My name is Finley, and I'm 30 years old. On my 30th birthday, my parents invited me to a special family dinner, and I remember rereading that message 3 times, because for once it sounded warm, almost hopeful, like maybe the distance between us had finally softened. So I put on a simple green dress, practiced a smile in the mirror, and drove to the old restaurant near the river where we used to celebrate. Milestones back when milestones felt safe. And the moment I walked in, my stomach dropped because the room was full. 50-plus relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. People whispering behind folded napkins. And for one foolish second, I thought it was a surprise party. I actually smiled wider, thinking maybe this was their way of making it up to me. Because that's what birthdays are supposed to be. Right. Joy wrapped in cake and noise. But the air felt stiff, like everyone was holding their breath. And when I leaned in to hug my mom, she stiffened, barely touching me. My dad didn't meet my eyes, and I should have known then. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I sat where they pointed me, dead center, under the chandelier, like a spotlight I never asked for. And plates clinked, forks scraped. The server poured water like it was a funeral. And then my dad stood up, clinked his glass, and the room went silent in a way that still rings in my ears. And he said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "We're here to officially disown you for bringing shame to our family." And there it was, exactly like the words burned into my mind and into the moment. "We're here to disown you," announced at my 30th birthday, no hesitation, no mercy, and everyone stared at me, waiting for my reaction. Some faces curious, some smug, some pretending sympathy, and my mom nodded along like this was a reasonable agenda item, like this was a meeting and not my life. And my dad kept talking, listing my sins like bullet points, moving out without permission, choosing a career they didn't approve of, refusing an arranged future they'd planned without me, saying I embarrassed them by living on my own terms. And as he spoke, I felt myself detach, like I was watching a movie where the sound was slightly off. Because the louder he got, the quieter I felt inside. And I remembered being a kid, standing on a chair to reach the sink, promising myself I'd never need anyone's permission to breathe. And I realized this wasn't a dinner, it was a trial. And I was the accused without a lawyer. And then he ended it with a sentence that sliced through the room. "After tonight, you are no longer our daughter." And my aunt gasped theatrically. My cousin avoided my eyes, and someone coughed, like they were uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to stop it. And I looked down at my hands and noticed they weren't shaking, which surprised me, because my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. And I tasted metal in my mouth, humiliation mixed with rage, and in that second I understood the cruelty wasn't just in the words. It was in the audience, the way they needed witnesses to make it real, to make me small, to make sure I carried this shame out with me into the night. And for a heartbeat I considered standing up and leaving quietly, giving them the satisfaction of silence, but then my dad slid the microphone across the table toward himself like he owned the air, like my voice didn't exist. And something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean break where fear used to live. And I thought about every holiday I spent trying to earn love, every apology I gave for being myself, every time I bent until it hurt, and I realized this was the moment they'd chosen, my 30th birthday, to tell me who they thought I was, and I refused to let that be the final word. So when he paused and the room leaned in, I stood up slowly, felt the eyes follow me, felt the weight of all those expectations pressing down, and I reached for the microphone before anyone could stop me. Because if they were going to make a spectacle of my life, then I would at least get to speak in my own voice. And as my fingers closed around the mic, I looked out at the crowd, at my parents, at the people who thought they knew my story, and I knew whatever came next would change everything. I held the microphone tighter than I thought possible and said the words that would split my life, cleanly into before and after, my voice steady even though my chest felt like it was on fire. And I repeated it so everyone heard clearly. On my 30th birthday, my parents invited me to a special family dinner, and a ripple of confusion moved through the room, because now I was narrating the very moment they thought they controlled. When I arrived, I saw 50-plus relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins. I thought it was a surprise party. I paused and let that sink in, let them feel the shift. Then my dad stood up, clinked his glass, and announced, "We're here to officially disown you for bringing shame to our family." And this time, hearing it from my mouth, it sounded even uglier, even crueler. And I saw faces change. Not all of them, but enough. And I continued before anyone could interrupt me. Because I knew if I stopped, they'd take it back. Everyone stared at me, waiting for my reaction, I said, locking eyes with my mother. "So here it is." And I took a breath that felt like freedom for the first time in years. And I told them the truth they hated most. That the so-called shame was me choosing my own life. That the embarrassment was my independence. That the problem was never me, but their need to control. A daughter who stopped obeying. And my dad tried to laugh it off. Tried to wave his hand like I was being dramatic. But I didn't stop. I told them how I paid my own way. How I built my career without their help. How every boundary I set was treated like betrayal. And how love that only exists when you comply isn't love at all. It's a leash, and the room was silent now. Not the heavy silence from before, but an uncomfortable one. The kind that exposes things people want hidden. And I finished with the line that still echoes in my mind. If this is what being disowned looks like, then I accept it. But understand this, you don't get to erase me and still take credit for who I became. And then I did something that shocked even me. I smiled. Because in that moment I felt lighter than I had walking in. And I placed the microphone back on the table like a period at the end of a sentence they'd been writing for me my whole life. And I walked out while whispers exploded behind me. My aunt calling my name. My cousin staring like she'd just seen a ghost. My parents frozen in their seats and outside. The night air hit my face and I realized I wasn't crying. I was laughing, not because it was funny, but because the power they thought they had just evaporated. And the days that followed proved it. Calls came in from relatives who suddenly understood. Messages filled with awkward apologies. My parents tried to spin the story, telling people I'd humiliated them, but it didn't work the way it used to, because the truth was already out. And more importantly, I was finally out too. I blocked numbers without guilt. I slept better than I had in years, and for the first time, my birthday felt like it actually belonged to me. And if you're listening to this thinking about the times, you were made to feel small in front of people who were supposed to protect you. Remember this, silence only protects the people hurting you, not you, and sometimes grabbing the mic, literally or metaphorically, is how you take your life back. Because families can disown you, crowds can judge you, but the moment you choose yourself, you win. And if this story hit you, if it gave you strength or reminded you that you're not alone, then subscribe to the channel right now. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're proof that standing up for yourself can change everything.